Could we just bring forward anybody who's got expertise in the room around copyright policy? But I'll probably direct some of these to you, Senator Brandis, just given a speech that you made in February and subsequent media commentary around government policy on copyright. Could you just illuminate us? There was reporting earlier this year, I guess in February, subsequent to your speech to, I think it was the ADA, that you had taken a couple of propositions to Cabinet on graduated response. And
no, well, I didn't say that.
No.
And if I saw that reporting at the time, I've forgotten it. In any event, it's not correct. I've taken no submission to that effect to Cabinet.
It's actually the second time today I've heard that. So let's start from a clean slate then. What is government's policy and what's happening on copyright policy?
Well, the government's, or my attitude to this is broadly as set out in the speech that I gave to the Australian Digital Alliance, which was, as you are probably aware, Senator, only a day or so after the ALRC report was received. That report is under consideration. And we said this at the time of the election last year, as a matter of fact. The government is of the view that there does need to be reform to copyright. One of the issues, but it's not the only issue, which has been exercising my mind, is piracy. Unlike the United Kingdom, New Zealand, Canada, the United States, France, and many other comparable countries, Australia lacks any protection of any effective protection against online piracy. Australia, I'm sorry to say, is the worst offender of any country in the world when it comes to piracy, and I'm very concerned that the legitimate rights and interests of rights holders and content creators are being compromised by that activity. You weren't here for the arts estimates, Senator, but I should tell you that of all the communities who are most concerned about this, none is more concerned than arts practitioners, singers and filmmakers and people in those industries who see the fruit of their creative endeavours being stolen through piracy. So we want to do something about that.
Okay. The ALRC was precluded from dealing with questions of piracy and illegal file sharing. So it didn't address the question at all.
Well, so the ALRC reference was a reference, as you know, of the previous government.
Yeah, I know. But it didn't address the piracy question. So I might set aside the ALRC's review for the moment, just given that time's short, and concentrate on the piracy question. Where are you getting your information from to form your views? Who are you consulting, and through what vehicle are you forming your views, such as you've just presented to us?
Well, those are my views, Senator. I mean, the views that I expressed in the speech to which you've referred are legal and philosophical views. In particular, I want to stress a point I made in that speech, that the principles governing the protection of intellectual property and the reasons why we do that don't change merely because the platforms change.
Wasn't suggesting that they did.
No, but you asked me where I got my views from. Well, that is my view. I mean, I don't know. I've got that view on the basis of more than 40 years reading about law and philosophy, I suppose.
Have you spoken to any consumer groups such as Choice or ACAN who would probably contest your view that a graduated response or 3 strikes or any of those kind of propositions?
Well,
I haven't finished my question, Senator Brandis. Or any of those countries that you just listed at the outset that do have some versions of those schemes, that's actually not working very well in those jurisdictions, and then there might be other ways to tackle the problem more effectively that still preserve artists' right to be paid for their work.
Either I or my office, like Mr. Lambie, who has become something of an expert in this field, speak to stakeholders from all points of view all the time, and we've been doing that since we've been in government. We've been doing it while before that, when we were in opposition. I am very, very familiar with this debate. I've done a lot of reading about it. You ask about individuals. I doubt there is a stakeholder group who at one stage or another has not either spoken to or communicated with me or my staff.
So would that include Choice, for example?
And as Mr Wilkins reminds me, when Mr Wilkins and I were recently in the United States and the United Kingdom, we consulted with industry leaders in those countries to learn from the experience in those jurisdictions as well.
I know industry leaders have very strong views on these things. I'm asking you about groups like Choice or ACAN or others who might represent the consumer interest or the public interest even.
Well, I'm sorry, Senator, you say the public interest. There is a very strong public interest in the protection of private property, and that includes the protection of intellectual property.
Sure.
And
you're not going to answer my question, are you?
That also, you asked what I had done to inform myself about the public interest.
I've asked you twice whether you've met with Choice.
I'm sorry, you keep interrupting me, Senator, so let me finish my answer, please. If you choose to interrupt me, then you can't expect to get an answer. Let me answer your question. You identify the consumer and the public interest as if it excluded the right of content creators and people in the creative industries to protect the fruits of their intellectual and artistic endeavour. And I challenge that entirely. There is a very, very strong public interest in Australia doing that.
Sure.
And that is an interest that the government is very concerned to protect.
That's wonderful.
Not just to protect those individuals, but to protect the public interest of all Australians in having a thriving creative sector.
Have you met with Choice or ACAN in the process of forming your views?
I can't tell you whether my office has done so. I imagine they have.
Have you, was the question.
I can't remember whether I have done. I may well have done because I've been involved in this debate for several years.
I'm talking about in the formation of the speech that you gave at the ADA in February. You can't recall.
No, that's not what I said. I said I've been involved in this debate for several years, and over that several years I've met with numberless stakeholders from all points of view. So I imagine I have, but it may have been a while ago. In relation to the preparation of the particular speech about which you asked me, it's not really my practice, Senator, to write speeches on the back of meetings with stakeholders, and if you've read that speech, you'll see that it's a conceptual speech rather than a speech that goes into specific policy detail.
Is there a task force or a particular working group or a unit, or I'll let you choose the most appropriate language, within the department that is working on copyright reform at the moment? Either the narrow issues that I'm questioning you with here or the broader issues?
Yeah, there's certainly a group of people, Senator, working on copyright issues.
Great. Yes. How do we identify that group? What are they? What's their
formal?
How
do we identify them?
What's their formal standing?
Sorry. It's basically your section, isn't it?
Yeah. So, Senator, it's in the Civil Law Division of the department. What we've done, given the comments the Attorney and Government has made, we took a group of people offline to basically have the capacity to do some fresh thinking about copyright. So it's essentially an internal working group.
Okay, what's its title? Who's its secretary?
It doesn't have a secretary. It's just a group within the department.
It's part of the department.
Okay. So I've been led to believe that there's some kind of formal task group that had been stood up to examine these issues. You're telling me that's not the case?
Well, I think it's semantics, actually. There's a group of people who are working on this stuff.
And what's the name of that group?
What do you call yourselves?
Andrew Walter, Assistant Secretary, Commercial and Administrative Law Branch. They don't really have a formal title. There's 4 people. They work in my branch. We're calling them a copyright team at the moment, for want of a better phrase.
All right. And presumably they are examining, among other things, some of the issues that I've been discussing with the Attorney.
Well, I'm not sure what issues you've been discussing, because although you've been asking me about my views and who I've met with, you actually haven't identified any particular issue at all in your question.
You haven't been paying very close attention.
No,
I've
I've
asked
been
you a couple
listening
of times about graduated response, knocking people
well, you
offline.
mentioned graduated response
That's an
once
issue. Yeah.
as a proposal that is favoured by some.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean when you talk about the issues? Because there are a lot of issues here. I mean, I'm happy to talk to you about them, Senator, but...
Let's just stick to that one.
Yes. What's your question?
Is the task group examining graduated response as a potential solution to piracy or illegal file sharing?
Well,
yes, that's one. Yeah. That's one option.
Yeah, that was easy, wasn't it? Okay. So
well, I don't know why you're being sarcastic towards my officials, Senator.
Because there seems to be a certain amount of ducking and weaving.
No, there's no ducking
That's
and
why.
weaving.
All right, let's proceed.
If you would ask specific questions,
I'm attempting
you'll
to.
get specific answers.
Let's proceed. Under previous, I think the previous 2 or maybe 3 Attorney Generals under former government, which I think you were involved in, Mr Wilkins, there were consultations, quite active consultations between rights holders and internet service providers. Are those talks continuing in any shape?
And consumers. ACAN was part of that too.
Eventually, yeah. Not initially, they weren't. I'm reasonably familiar with the history of this one.
Well, they were part of it, weren't they then, Senator? You
Eventually, yeah.
Well, I'm not sure what eventually means.
One of them had to conflict themselves out, I believe, or maybe both of them. But it's all right. Let's not quibble. Are those talks still afoot?
No.
They're not.
I think, Senator, if you've followed, this isn't really a political point, but if you've followed this issue, you'd probably be aware of a decision by the High Court called the IINet case.
Very well aware of it.
Which was delivered in June of 2012. I think it's fair to say that after the High Court delivered that judgment not quite 2 years ago, a lot of the pressure on the ISPs to come to the table went away because the ISPs had a very comprehensive victory in the IINet case.
Yeah.
And I don't say this about all of the ISPs, but certainly in relation to some of them. I think both the previous government and the new government have found that since the IINet judgment came down, there's been less willingness on the part of some ISPs to come to the table. Now that being said, I don't want to say that that's the case in relation to all of the ISPs. For example, only earlier in the month I had a very long conversation with Mr Thodey and Mr Shaw from Telstra, and if I may say so publicly, I think Telstra's contribution to this issue and their willingness to work to find a solution to the piracy issue, which is really unaddressed in Australia, has been very commendable.
So, Senator Brandis, you did bring quite a sense of urgency to that question, the piracy question. You dwelt in your speech, I'm referring to the ADA speech.
Well,
so
you might think so, Senator. I wouldn't use that word to characterise my speech. I think it's an important issue. It's something that the government is addressing, but of course we want to get the right answer. It's a contested policy space, and being a Liberal government, what we want primarily to do is to see if the various industry participants can be brought to the table and find themselves in agreement rather than having a solution imposed from on high, the way that some would have had it.
I would call this a rare moment of agreement between us. So what is the government actually doing to progress the issue? If those talks
the matter is under active consideration right now. I had a meeting with certain of the key decision makers in this matter as recently as 7 o'clock last night.
Who were those key decision makers?
I'm not going to be disclosing in a public forum who I meet with, Senator.
Well, why bring it up at all?
Because I'm using that to illustrate the point that this is a matter. This is a matter, Senator, with which I have been seized more than I think any other issue in the last fortnight. This is very, very actively being pursued by the government right now.
Okay, so that's your time, Senator Ludlam. We'll come back to you later. Just before I